The People's Market is pleased to be associated with the movement that empowers.
Behind the picturesque landscapes and thriving communities lies a powerful force, the credit union movement of Barbados, where dreams have found a home and communities have thrived. During this month of October 2023, my community will embark on a journey through time, exploring a movement that has touched the lives of countless Barbadians, nurtured dreams, strengthened bonds, and built resilient communities. Welcome to my community. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, I'm pleased that you have joined us. This is the story of the credit union movement in Barbados and its role in building Barbadian communities. Well, join us now as we uncover the history, the people, and the incredible stories that make the credit union movement in Barbados a testament to resilience, community, and dreams realized. To get a better understanding of the movement, we must step back to a time when a number of visionary individuals in Barbados came together with a common dream to empower their fellow Barbadians, to provide financial solutions, and to build stronger and more resilient communities. Historian Dr. Henderson Carter places the movement squarely in perspective.
I want to start first with the concept of money. In other words, where did the money come from to establish credit unions, to establish the financial institutions that even predated credit unions? And I want to go back to slavery or enslavement, that period of history before 1838, when laborers were put to work in the fields, were put to work in the cities without getting any money at all. Those laborers, especially those in the country districts, brought their provisions to Bridgetown diligently every Sunday. We call it the Sunday market. They sold those provisions in a place called the Butcher's Market, what is now called Jubilee Gardens. And the Jubilee Gardens was a good spot because on the southern side, you could get the sailors coming through from the port. And on the northern side, you had the congregants from the St. Mary's Anglican Church. After church, they're coming into the market and they're buying fruits and vegetables, they're buying bread, they're even buying wine. That Sunday market was a very important feature in the formation of financial institutions for the working people, the black working people, so that people saved their money, even during slavery. A lot of enslaved people were able to buy themselves out of slavery, even before 1838. So you ask the question, where did the enslaved people get money to put in susus and to put in friendly societies? They got their money from the Sunday market. In addition to that, some enslaved people got odd jobs, especially those who were working in the city as barbers, as porters, as washerwomen, and they saved their money and they used institutions like the Friendly Society. And it would surprise us that in 1834, August 1834, there's a statement coming out of the newspaper called The Barbadian, talking about the existence of friendly societies in St. John and in Bridgetown. And that's important. Normally, we trace friendly societies from the mid-19th century, but it goes further back. August 1834, we have the presence of friendly societies in Bridgetown and in the parish of St. John. And of course, those friendly societies mushroomed over the years. But we'll get back to the friendly societies. I want to continue with the point about money. Where did the money come from to put into these financial organizations? The second point about the source of this money is, of course, that migration from Barbados to Guyana and Trinidad after emancipation, where workers were getting higher wages, sometimes 2 shillings, 4 shillings, instead of 1 shilling here in Barbados. These workers brought back their monies and they saved them in these friendly societies. And throughout that period, into the 1840s, into the 1860s, these workers are going to Guyana and Trinidad and they're coming back. But the greatest source of this finance that was injected into friendly societies came by the way of Panama migration. We call it Panama money. Between 1900 and about 1920, it is estimated by Bonham Richardson in his book Panama Money that about $10 million was pumped into the Barbadian economy through that migration to Panama. You're talking about 40 to 60,000 people migrating during that period. Some of them died in Panama. Some of them returned to Barbados. And some of them who did not return created societies in friendly societies in Panama. And one of those friendly societies is, of course, the Panama Progressive Society that saved thousands of dollars. And in 1943, between 1941, and 1943, bought 5 estates in Barbados. 5 estates, spending a whopping £52,000. And you have, for example, Colleton, Fort Hill. We have Lascelles, Mount Prospect. We have Trent's, bought for £52,000 in total. And that was a tremendous investment. You're investing in land at a time when black people did not own so much land. You're investing in great houses as well. And sadly, black control of those estates did not last very long. So that by 1970, most of those estates had run into financial difficulties because of management issues, and some of them had to be sold back to the planter class. But the point remains is that Panama money was instrumental in pumping that important resource into the Barbados economy through the investment in plantations, but not only plantations. They bought house, so that a lot of the lumber yards, the white lumber yards in Bridgetown in the 1920s benefited from that injection of Panama money. People bought land as well. And of course, that money eventually found itself into friendly societies. And the other source of that capital that was injected into friendly societies was, of course, the wages and the peasant earnings of those persons who bought land, who rented plantation land, so that, for example, in places like Draxhall, you have the plantation renting out land to those persons who worked on the plantation. And at the end of the year, having sold your crop, you were able to make a substantial sum of money. And that money was used for house repairs. That money was used to send children to school, but some of it was also invested into friendly societies. So therefore, you have a situation where money is coming from various sources. Now, in the latter half of the 20th century, when the society and the economy expands, a lot of the money is coming from the tourism industry, the manufacturing industry, and a big chunk of it comes from the civil service, because a lot of these credit unions that came into existence after 1961, a lot of the members are civil servants who are able to work for higher wages than the plantation workers. So it's important, therefore, when you're looking at the growth of credit unions, to go back and ask yourself, where did the money come from? The second point relates to the organizations, the financial organizations that preceded credit unions in the 1950s. In other words, what were these financial organizations? I want to start with at the very basic, what we call the SUSU, the meet in turn, or the box hand. And those meet in turns were village organizations, or organizations birthed in certain small groups. For example, you could have a situation at a church where 10, 15 members band themselves together to have a meet in turn. And these are small amounts. You know, it could be $1 a week, you know, small turns. And those were the institutions that gave the workers a lump sum when they needed it, a lump sum to to make a cash purchase of a bed or a chair or something of significant value. And those meet in turns have continued up till this day. And you have in various organizations, workers forming themselves into a trusted group where they would put in at the end of the week or the end of the month a certain amount of money. And even at the University of West Indies, various organizations, you have meetings turns still going on among workers there. So the meeting turn, therefore, started in the 19th century and it continues today. The problem with the meeting turn, though, is that it was an organization of trust. And if one person or two persons decided that they would not meet their requirements and their stipulations, then it caused problems. Or if the secretary or the treasurer decided to run away with the money, then it caused problems. And it did. There were several cases that I know of where treasurers and secretaries just disappeared with the finances. And that really called for tighter organizations. And that is why the Friendly Society was introduced. Because here it is that you have a larger organization. It's not just based on a small informal group, but you have a more formal organization with a secretary and treasurer and president. And in most of those friendly societies, they chose headmasters and priests to lead them, okay? Because those persons were held in high esteem in the 19th and the early 20th century, headmasters and priests. And many of them were located in villages, okay? Because the village structure was very strong. The village raised the person. The village raised the young man and the young girl. And most of the activities occurred in villages. As a matter of fact, you could get everything in the village. You had the church, you had the friendly society, you had the school, you had the village shop or the grocery shop. Some people call it the rum shop, but the grocery shop had a little sidebar for rum, but mainly for groceries. And you went to the grocery shop every day because there was no refrigeration. So you had to buy your cheese and your butter every day. And that village was an institution in itself. And within the village, you have the friendly societies meeting the needs of the villagers. Now, how did the friendly societies operate? You paid in on a weekly basis a certain amount. It could be 12 cents, it could be 30 cents, it could be $1. And some friendly societies had certain grades. So in a low grade situation, you could pay as low as 12 cents a week. Now, having paid that amount, there were certain benefits that you could achieve as a member of the friendly society. One was a sickness benefit. So if you got ill, you got sick, you could not work for 4 or 5 weeks, you would get a benefit. The friendly society would pay you a benefit. And this, I must add, was long before the introduction of national insurance in 1967. Today, if we get ill, we have the national insurance to depend on. But those workers saw it fit to have a built-in national insurance scheme within the friendly society. And if, God forbid, you died, your family got a funeral benefit. In some cases, as much as $240 for people in the higher class. Okay? So that funeral benefit ensured that you had a respectable burial with a good casket and, what we call a good turnout in those days in the 1930s and 1940s, because Barbadians are very conscious about the burying the dead. And even though they're poor, even though they did not have a lot of means, they still recognize that the dead ought to be sent off in a very special fashion. And the Friendly Society assisted Barbadians in doing that. And the third benefit of the Friendly Society came at Christmas time. At Christmas time, you could expect a bonus payment to do any household work that you had. Change some boards, change your roof, buy a bed, or buy a new radio. Those were the ways in which the bonus could be used. So you have a friendly society, or you have many friendly societies operating in Barbados from the 1830s right up to the 1980s. Now, this is 150 years. 150 years of operation. For example, in the 1920s, there were over 200 friendly societies in Barbados. Now, as time went on, many of these friendly societies amalgamated. Some went out of existence. And by the 1950s, there were two major friendly societies in Barbados: the Unique Progressive Friendly Society and the Civic Friendly Society. The Civic in the 1950s had 45,000 people. 45,000 people in the 1950s. A massive friendly society. And it went out of existence around 1981. And it still had 10,000 people in 1981, even though we had credit unions well established by then, around that period. So the Friendly Society movement had a very long and illustrious history. And of course, you would understand that with the evolution of national insurance, people did not see that friendly society as very important, because you could have national insurance deducted from your wages without necessarily having to put that in a friendly society. So we have these friendly societies, therefore, operating in Barbados right up until the 1980s. I now want to go back to another important organization that preceded the credit union movement, and that was the Barbados Cooperative Bank, or the Penny Bank, established by McDonald Simmons in 1937. Now, this is a black entrepreneur. Mackie Simmons was a black entrepreneur who established a bank in 1937. And this is important to see black people at the forefront of financial institutions. Normally, when you talk about financial institutions, you're talking about the white planter class, the white merchant class, who established institutions like the Barbados Mutual back in 1840, which continues today. And you have the banks like Barclays Bank and Scotia Bank, etc. But we do not pay enough attention to the Penny Bank, established in 1937 and ran up until 1962. That Penny Bank had over 22,000 persons on its register in 1960. And that's important. 22,000 persons on the register making deposits, withdrawing deposits from the bank. And the bank sadly failed in 1962. There was a run on the bank, and that collapsed. And it's a pity that that bank, having started then, that indigenous bank, could not continue beyond 1962. So the point we're making, therefore, is that before the credit union movement started, you have this indigenous bank. And the bank, Mackie Simmons' bank, made investments in plantations. Perhaps that was the downfall. So you have Joe's River plantation in St. Joseph, owned by the bank. Several plantations owned by the bank. But what it did for Barbadians is that it allowed people to get loans, to buy certain properties in places like Grisette's, in Caneville in Christchurch, and in Welch's, St. Michael. So you see those bungalows in those places? That was the result of the loans and the financing from the Barbados Cooperative Bank. So you have, therefore, a bank playing a major role in creating a middle class or middle class communities in the 1950s and 1960s. And that was important for the infrastructural development of Barbados, because you have a situation where you have small huts and villages and in tenantries and a plantation landscape. So the bank helped to break down that plantation monopoly on land and change the landscape of Barbados. We move now into the credit union organization itself. Now, the credit union organization came out of the 1937 rebellion in Barbados, where the workers who had rallied behind Clement Payne at those political meetings in Golden Square, the Lower Green, rioted for over 5 days, 2 days in the city, and about 3 to 4 days in the countryside, looting shops, looting potato fields, commandeering buses, stopping cars, etc. And that caused the planter class and the British government to become concerned, because it was not only happening in Barbados, it had happened in Trinidad, it had happened in St. Kitts, St. Vincent. And the British government decided to send a royal commission to Barbados to investigate what was happening. We also had in Barbados a Dean Commission to investigate. But after those commissions reported, the Secretary of State for the Colonies in 1947 urged upon the ruling class in Barbados the necessity of having credit unions in this country and other places as well. And that's important for the Secretary of State for the Colonies to make that intervention and to say to the ruling planter class, do all you can to establish credit unions. In addition to the Secretary of State, you have missionaries coming to the region, missionaries from Canada, missionaries from the United States, who had already experienced the importance of credit unions. And these missionaries are establishing churches in our villages. But they're also urging the authorities and urging the people to establish these credit unions. So you have the missionary intervention to do something. And the government of the day concedes. And this government that conceded in the 1947 period was a government made up not strictly of the planter class, but this was a government made up of the rising middle class, with people like Winter Crawford, people like Sir Grantley Adams, who had already established the Barbados Labour Party and the union arm of that party. The Adams government, and Adams became leader of the House of Assembly. And in the 1940s through the 1950s, he was responsible for a lot of the legislation that was passed. Ian Crawford was passed in Parliament. So you have, therefore, the support of the black working class in Parliament. Without their presence, I am not sure that credit unions would have taken root in Barbados.
Well, there you have it, a confluence of events and key individuals. In a sense, their actions laid the foundation for what we know today as the modern credit union movement in Barbados, a movement that continues to build Barbadian communities. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. This has been My Community. Take good care of yourself and look out for the interests of your neighbors. The series continues next week at the same time.
The People's Market is pleased to be associated with the movement that empowers.